Hello again, Year 5, and welcome to the 7th lesson in this series of 10 based on the Windrush and the theme of community. Let's get started. Now, for you today is a short activity to get ourselves started. Called Ships Ahoy. In the pictures are some famous ships, and you'll see their names at the side of the screen. The RMS Titanic, the HMS Victory, the HMS Warrior, the Mayflower, and the Mary Rose. Hopefully you've heard of some of these ships. You may even have been to visit a few of them. Can you match the image to the ship? Extra points if you're able to order these ships from the oldest to the youngest. Stop the video now so you can have a go at this activity. Welcome back. Let's see which ship is which. Down there in the corner is the RMS Titanic. You can see her 4 funnels there. Next up, we have the HMS Victory here. Very distinctive with those stripes. Also down the bottom of your screen, we have the HMS Warrior. Up in the top corner, we have the Mayflower. And we've got the Mary Rose just behind me here. Now, did you have a go at ordering them from the oldest to the youngest? Here are some dates to help you out. So we've got the Mary Rose, which was commissioned in 1511. The Mayflower was built around the 1620s. HMS Victory in 1759. The 1860s saw the HMS Warrior being built. And in 1912, the Titanic took her maiden voyage. Excellent work. Shall we get started with today? Now, in today's lesson, we're getting to a point in our story where some more challenging views are going to need to be confronted. In order for us to do that and to talk about this in the right manner, here is some new vocabulary. Some words that you may have heard of before, and some that you might not. Please stop the video now if you would like to spend the time to make your own glossary of these terms so that you can refer back to them. Let's have a look at the meanings. Racism is our first word. This is about the opinion or the belief that a particular race or of people is better than another race or races. It also includes the unfair treatment of people based on the opinion that one race is better than another race or races. Prejudice. Prejudice is an opinion that is formed without knowing all the facts. Inequality. This is the opposite to equality, where everything is equal and the same, of the same worth. Inequality is about not being equal. Our last word is discrimination. The act of seeing differences or distinguishing between things. So making out those differences, making them more apparent than they need to be. Or the act of treating some people unfairly because of a prejudice that you may have. So that opinion formed without really knowing and understanding the facts may lead you to be discriminatory against somebody else and may change the way that you treat them. This is why it's important for us to educate ourselves and to find out the facts before formulating strong opinions. Now that we've got these under our belt and we can recognize them, let's find out what happened to the Windrush generation as they began to make Britain their home. We're coming back to our book now and looking at Chapter 5, Settling Down. Another big challenge for the Windrush arrivals was finding a place to live. Once they had found jobs, they had to leave Clapham's South deep-levelled shelter. But many white people didn't want to rent their rooms to black people. When Mr. and Mrs. Cecil Holness saw an advertisement for a room to rent in Tooting, South London, Mrs. Holness phoned in advance to inform the landlady that she wasn't English. But when she arrived, she was refused the room. The landlady didn't mind renting the room to a foreigner, but she didn't want to rent a room to a black foreigner. Many of the Windrush newcomers had a similar experience. It wasn't because they didn't have the money to pay the rent or because of anything they had done. They were refused somewhere to live simply because they were black. Not everyone who had sailed on the Windrush planned to stay in Britain permanently. Some people just wanted to work hard, make money, and then return to the Caribbean when the living conditions there had improved. Others who stayed came together and tried to develop their own community. They formed their own churches so that they wouldn't have to face being made to feel unwelcome in the white British Christian churches. Others used an African savings method to help each other so they didn't need to go to the banks for money. Some managed to buy their own houses and would then rent spare rooms to other Caribbean people. Now, this chapter strikes a bit of a chord. Everything up until this moment has really been singing about the support that the community, the Caribbean community, had given Britain, and the appreciation that the British public and the British government had for those coming over from the West Indies, especially from their support from and during the World Wars. I'm going to share with you now some excerpts from a Channel 4 documentary that was made about the veterans of the Windrush generation. And as you watch this video, I want you to jot down some notes about some of the experiences that members of the Windrush generation were subjected to. Maybe even jot down how you feel about the way that they may have been treated. These can be used later when we bring all our ideas together.
When I first arrived, I came to meet an uncle of mine who was already established here. So we lived with him for, another cousin and I lived with him for a little while, well, probably about 3 months, until we could find ourselves our own digs. But that was difficult to get hold of in those days, and you're often greeted with the sign, no blacks, no dogs, no Irish.
When I get to England, it was strange. I cried for about a week. I didn't know anybody here.
In St. Vincent, even now, most people would meet you in the street and never set eyes on you before, but they tell you hello. Good morning, sir. Good morning, madam. Then you go to England. When I got to Tottenham, I never forget, maybe the first day or two, just walking around the area and see people in the garden hanging out their clothes. I was only a teenager. And I said, good morning, and the lady just turned her back and continued hanging out her clothes. And when I told my brother, who I was staying with, he laughed and he said, boy, this is England. White people don't talk to you like that in the street.
2,000 went through Notting Hill's streets, smashing windows and shouting plainly racialist slogans, demanding the deportation of all black immigrants.
One, I think it was a Sunday afternoon, when a cousin of mine and I visited Hyde Park and was almost naturally chased around by this gang of about 5 or 6 youths.
I remember arriving at the Ministry of Defense building as very young senior NCO, only to be told by the officer I was reporting to, quite a senior officer, that you can't work here, you're black.
My administrative officer at the time, he sent for me one morning, great gleaming smile on his face below his mustache. And he said to me, Corporal, your promotion to sergeant has come through. But, and the smile disappeared from his face. But, he said, I'm not going to let you have it. I don't think our corps is ready for black sergeants. The bottom fell out of me, to say the least.
So opinions about the Windrush generation arriving in Britain may not have been as positive as we once thought. Here's a quote that's been taken from the newspaper The Guardian, which was printed in 1948. So once again, we need to be aware that this was printed a long time ago and that some of the views may be very different now. Here's what the quote says. Britain has welcomed displaced persons and has given employment to Poles who cannot go home. This is right, said one of the immigrants. Surely then there is nothing against our coming, for we are British subjects. If there is it because we are coloured? So in this quote, we see the reporter stating that Britain has welcomed other migrants to Britain previously, wanted to be there to help them, to give them a new home. And when they refer to Poles, what they are referring to are people from Poland. The question then is, why is it that those people from the Caribbean are not being made to feel so welcome? That the only reason that they might not be accepted is due to the colour of their skin. This paints a very different picture to the Together poster that we looked at a few lessons ago. And it's interesting that even in 1948, we can see this questioning about how welcome Britain made its migrants feel. For many of you, you would have been introduced to the British values in your classes. Have a little read of the screen now to remind yourself of those values. Individual liberty, the right to make our own choices. The rule of law, following rules to develop order and understanding rules and why they're important. Democracy, making decisions together. The right to an opinion or a voice. Tolerance, learning about different faiths and cultures. Listening to other viewpoints. Learning about diversity. And mutual respect, treating others as you wanted to be treated. Respect for each other and working together. It seems obvious that we would want to uphold these values to show great citizenship. But it'd be interesting for you to note that these set of British values weren't being shared and hadn't been collaborated until 2011. So before 2011, whilst there were these expectations for British citizens about following a rule of law, about democracy, about tolerance and mutual respect, and about celebrating individual liberty, it wasn't something that was being wholeheartedly promoted necessarily in order to be a good citizen. And it was felt that in 2011 that the government felt the need to bring people together and unite them with a set of values for all people to adhere to and work towards and encourage amongst others. Have a think now about what the impact might have been on British citizens and on the Windrush generation if these values had been more apparent, had been more obvious earlier in our history. So, for example, if we were celebrating these British values in 1940, so during the war, before the Windrush generation joined and migrated to Britain. Pause the video now to take some time to think about that. Welcome back. There's a lot of deep thinking going on out there. And it's sometimes quite a difficult concept to get your mind round. But I wonder if mutual respect and tolerance had been given greater emphasis in our daily lives throughout the early 1900s, would the wars have happened? Would the Windrush generation have experienced such difficulties in finding homes and places to stay when they arrived in Britain? Or would they have faced as many challenges as they had trying to work their way up the career path, up the career ladder, and taking on promotions and being in leadership positions? With this in mind, your task today is going to be to create a poster or a leaflet to celebrate the diversity in Britain today. Things you might want to think about and include are the links to our British values, making reference to tolerance, to mutual respect. You may want to make reference to things that we can learn from each other. What have you learnt about the Windrush generation and what they've brought to Britain? And I also want you to think about why it's important to celebrate this diversity and our differences. Maybe you can explain that in your leaflet. Or maybe you can share that thought as a heading for your poster. I look forward to being able to see and celebrate diversity with you. That's it for today. But I'll see you again tomorrow in our next session.